All right. Well, we're going to get started. We're right at the 12 o'clock mark. I know that we have a few more people registered for the webinar, but we'll dive in just because I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I'll just start out with a quick introduction. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Joel Simmons. I'm the Manager of Student Conduct and Case Management, and I work in the Office of Student Affairs, located on the Thunder Bay campus. So just want to first off, thank you for joining today's presentation. Everything you wanted to know about Chegg.com, but we're afraid to ask. Hopefully you're aware that this presentation is part of a larger initiative at Lakehead this week, which is Academic Integrity Awareness Week. And actually, today specifically is International Day Against Contract Cheating, hence why we slotted in this Chegg presentation today. So so this is the second year that Lakehead has participated in Academic Integrity Awareness Week. This may be the first time that you're hearing about it. Last year, when we ran the week, we only had workshops and webinars for students. But based on feedback and wanting to build this into something bigger and better at the institution, this year we've added quite a few events for our faculty members and instructors. You may have already participated in some of those this week, since what day is it? The days all blend in here. It's Wednesday, right? So we're partway through the week. You may have already participated, which is great. But if you haven't, that's okay too. But now will be probably the time where I just insert a little bit of a shameless plug here for the remaining events that we have planned, things that are happening later on this week. So tomorrow at noon, we have a presentation on best practices related to academic writing and kind of addressing plagiarism specifically. And it's more of a practical tools kind of presentation, like, we go through 10 different points, things that you can implement easily to make a big difference in addressing the issue of plagiarism with your students. Later on in the afternoon at 3 p.m. tomorrow, again, related to the topic of writing, we have a short 30-minute webinar led by the coordinator of the Academic Support Zone, Abhi Riao. He's going to be doing a presentation called Top 5 Tips for Developing a Writing Rubric. Again, focused on the very practical. This session presents kind of 5 different tips that will help instructors rethink their academic writing rubrics and how they grade written assignments. So that one's going to be good, and it's a nice short one too, so you can jump in on that hopefully if it fits your schedule. And then lastly, on Friday, we have the AIM course kind of virtual tour and Q&A time. And the session on Friday is really designed for anyone who is unfamiliar with Lakehead's Academic Integrity Matters course. If you've never heard of it, you don't know what it is, it would be a great chance just to jump in, get a guided tour kind of through the, the D2L course and learn how to actually use AIM with your students. So, all right, that's enough for advertising today. Let's jump into today's session by starting with a little bit of a background. When it comes to academic integrity violations and the typical trends that we see here at Lakehead, and I guess not just for Lakehead, but at all institutions, most of the violations that we typically see are related to some form of plagiarism. That's why even just the different events that I was kind of promoting are related to academic writing and plagiarism. So the violations we typically see are, from minor failures to cite sources, to students kind of just struggling with the concept of paraphrasing and how to put things in their own words. And then we do get the odd, just very blatant copying of an entire essay. Doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. So this is kind of what we saw pre-COVID, and then COVID hit, and the funniest thing happened. The world kind of shut down, but it didn't. We kind of kept having to just push on through everything. We stopped in-person, face-to-face contact and teaching, in person. But courses continued online, right? And we all just, did our best to try to adjust as quickly as we could to figure out, thinking of 2020 in particular, we're all just trying to figure out how to finish off the year, with the teaching content. And then a month later, after, everything shut down, we get into April 2020, a month later, and everybody was like, okay, now, what do we do about final exams? Everyone started, frantically looking into different kinds of online proctoring, either by artificial intelligence software or by the instructor actually just watching through a live like Zoom session. But those have their limitations and challenges, which we can't get into today, unfortunately. So all of us had to figure out a way to administer our exams remotely somehow while still upholding academic integrity. Because you think about pre-pandemic, instead everybody would just be heading into the classroom or into the field house. They'd be sitting in a desk, at their desk that's cleared of any sort of electronic devices or notepads or whatever. They would be gathered with a whole bunch of other students, watched closely by invigilators, and cheating was nearly impossible. I know there was some creative ways that students still figured out how to bring in cheat sheets and things like that, but it was very, very rare. And then fast forward a little bit and we get into the pandemic, and now we have students sitting at home on their laptops writing their final exams by themselves. And some exams were given a closed book and banked on students just being honest and following all of the typical rules, which, please hear me loud and clear on this point specifically, most students this was the case. They were honest, they followed the rules, and they treated it as if it was a closed book exam, while sitting in front of their computers. But this is the big but here, is some students were not compliant. Some students, when faced with the situation where they didn't know an answer on an exam and their phone, was right there. It was a big, phone just being a portal to all this information you could ever want. And some students stumbled, okay? Instructors obviously started noticing this. Some students' answers were similar to other students. Sometimes they'd pick up on odd sentences, terminology that wasn't used in their textbooks or lectures. Sometimes, flags were raised because students gave the wrong solution completely. And sort of instructors were just like, where did they get this from? And then instructors started digging around a little bit, Googling their exam questions, and they started to notice these Chegg.com links coming up in their Google search. And upon further investigation, discovered that their exam questions were posted verbatim on these homework help websites. And we're talking specifically today about Chegg. We go further than that. Some faculty went on to actually purchase a subscription so they could actually access the solutions to the exam questions. And lo and behold, the solutions that were provided by the experts, as they call them, were identical to the ones that students submitted in their class. And as a result, academic integrity investigations ensued. Many students were given zeros on their exams, which caused them to, often to fail our course or to have to retake the course. And it was just a disaster, okay? So we went from having cheating on final exams be really not an issue at all to being something that we were all starting to notice. And again, it's not the majority of students, but there was a larger portion. So today, even though, I think life is starting to return to normal for a lot of us. Some of us are still working from home. I can see some of us are back in the office, like myself. COVID restrictions are lifting, but we're not out of the woods yet. And a lot of our exams are still offered or going to be offered remotely this term. And who knows, with next term, we're still not quite certain how it's going to look. So Chegg is still a problem worth talking about. And I'm guessing that's why you're here today. So let's talk about Chegg. All right, so what is Chegg? I'm guessing there may be sort of a group here who know it very well, who spend a lot of time struggling with Chegg already. Maybe people here who have kind of heard about it a little bit or heard from their colleagues that students use this website or this service, and they just want to learn more. So I know we kind of might be coming from all sorts of backgrounds here. So let me just give you a quick rundown. To quote Chegg's website, if you were to actually look at and see what Chegg advertises themselves as, they would say that they are the leading student-first connected learning platform with a mission to help every student achieve their best in school and beyond. They state that they strive to improve educational outcomes by putting the student first and by providing tools designed to help them in their course materials, to succeed in their classes, to save money on required materials, and to learn the most in-demand skills. So is often with like organizations' vision statements and mandates and things like that. You're like, okay, what does this really actually mean? How do they achieve these goals? Well, Chegg offers a variety of tools. Okay, so if you look into it a little bit more, Chegg offers things just like flashcards, so you can gamify studying and learning. They offer practice tests for a wide variety of courses. They have plagiarism and grammar checkers. They do have a digital textbook kind of rental service to start to try to cut the costs for students, so they don't have to purchase textbooks. They can just kind of rent digital copies of it. And they did at one point offer actual connected tutoring services virtually, but those have been discontinued since last year. Now, what their main product is, and where they get their most traffic and usage, is this expert Q&A service, which is really where students can post a homework question and they get an expert answer. And what Chegg would say, get an expert answer in as little as 2 hours, which, based on their vision statement and the tools that are available, like kind of look at this list, you're like, okay, well, if it's like some practice tests, they got this kind of proofreading services and flashcards or whatever, maybe it's not that bad, right? And there could potentially be some really valuable services that they could offer students to help, in addition to what we're able to actually provide them as post-secondary institutions. I want to just kind of look at the way that they target students, though, and how they advertise. So if you look at these are a series of advertisements that might show up in a web browser of students, because they can, again, specifically target students through targeted advertising through various web services. And here are some of the catchy hooks that they have, right? If you think, what do you notice first? You see 2 of them are like kind of students laying down sleeping. They're not having to do all-nighters, which I think sometimes, like when students are just like, they've got an overwhelming amount of workload, like, I just crave sleep, right? So it's like they see a student sleeping and all-nighters. Yeah, sign me up, right? Other things on here would be like, college isn't hard, just study smarter. And like, why? I don't want to just be, foolish and just study not effective. I want to be studying smarter. I don't want to study hard. I want to study smarter. So there's kind of these little catchy hooks that they use to get students to bite and then to explore their services more. These would be some of the posts that show up in more, I think, like Instagram and things like that, on social media platforms. Proven strategies for top scores. So you could have students that are really just about like, the overachieving students who want to get like 90s. They want to get 100. They want to get perfect. They want to have proven strategies for top scores. Or study your way, anytime, anywhere, right? So like you kind of think about the me-centered culture. It's like students are juggling jobs and school and classes and stuff, so they can kind of study in their own time. So there's that appeal. The ones that concern me the most are, the top right 2, where it's solutions for millions of homework problems. Okay, so the solutions are there at the fingertips of students, or how to finish your homework faster, right? Well, how do you finish your homework faster? There's a couple different ways you could do that. So while, if you think about, at least back in my day, I remember you'd have your textbook. There'd be some example questions in the back of the textbook. There'd be the solutions, and you could flip and look at the solutions to kind of help you out, because it is beneficial to, especially in like the maths and sciences and things like that, if you're doing calculations and things, it is helpful to be able to kind of quiz yourself on something and go and actually look at the tools that are, or the answers, sorry, rather the solutions, so you know that you're actually doing it right. But you could see how someone, during an assignment could have this advertisement pop up in their web browser and be like, yeah, like I need help. I'm not getting these concepts. I need to get some sleep. I need to get this done faster. And then they click on it. They see that, okay, for $24.95 a month, well, that's cheaper than a private tutor, right? And they can get it immediately. So it's like at their fingertips, fairly reasonably priced, targeted to them. And, because their assignment is due tomorrow. They need these answers. They need this help now. And then the student is hooked into the page, where you pay and it sort of starts to snowball from here. So when you kind of look at this, I just want to, just for a quick second, just look at, so their business plan, the way that they're marketing this, it's working. It's working very well. Their business model. Chegg has 4.4 million subscribers and a net worth. When I looked into it, it was stated there was a net worth of 12 billion, but this graph shows it's probably more like 9. There actually has been this like tremendous spike, especially since you look at 2020, that's where it just goes skyrockets, from like 4 billion up to like 15, and it sort of has its ups and downs since there. So it's doing incredibly well. And apparently 87% of college students in the US anyways, I don't know about the Canadian statistics, but 87% of college students in the US have heard of Chegg. And where all of this kind of comes to a head for most of us though, is Chegg can be used for assignments and to get even like more essays and writing and things like that. I think for most of us, the biggest concern comes from Chegg usage. And what we'll be focusing on today in this presentation is Chegg usage during online exams. A recent study found that the number of exam style questions in the STEM subjects, so science, technology, engineering, mathematics, the number of exam related style questions increased by 196% when comparing April to August of 2019 to April to August of 2020. And obviously, difference between 2019 and 2020, it corresponds exactly with when the pandemic hit and everything quickly shifted to online and online assessments. So how are students actually using Chegg to cheat? I mean, even when online exams are proctored, whether that's through AI software or by a real person, proctoring it through Zoom, or even with additional tools like the lockdown browsers and things like that, students can still snap a photo of a question with their phone just off the screen. So like right now, for example, I could be looking up at my screen, up at my camera, and I have my phone, literally, so here it is, like you can see, it's like my phone is up and I could take a picture of anything on the screen right now, and you can't see that. So students are able to quickly take a picture with their phone, just off screen. You can't see them doing it. And then, when they look down to, let's say, send off that image, it looks like they're typing, right? So it's impossible to spot through artificial intelligence or even just through you watching a student doing it. What they would then do is they would upload that image to Chegg, because you don't actually need to type out a question. You can see that this screenshot on the right-hand side is actually a question that was posted to Chegg. And you can actually see that sort of secondary green box, you might not be able to read it, but it actually says, next time, just snap a photo of your question. No typing, no scanning, no explanation required. Okay, so like this person who posted it actually went as far as like typing out the whole question. But all you have to do is just take a picture with your phone and upload it to Chegg, and they'll actually answer your question for you. Chegg, like I said in that previous slide, states that you'll have a solution within 2 hours. Not too long ago, they actually used to say that it's highly likely that you'll have an answer in 30 minutes. And according to some of my sources, other colleagues that I've been talking to, it's more likely that you'll actually have a solution in 5 to 15 minutes when the answers are posted. Okay, so students can take a picture, upload it, have answers right away in 5 to 15 minutes. So, thinking about an exam, they upload it, an expert answers it, they type in that answer, and boom, done, on to the next question. Or actually, they would upload the other questions while they're waiting for that question to be answered. So it's that easy. So what do we do? Well, there are organizations and movements trying to get contract cheating websites like Chegg shut down. I'm not sure whether there was a session just prior to this webinar of a panel of folks from around the world just talking about this very issue. There's some countries that have made websites like this illegal. That's not the case in Canada. So in the meantime, what can we do? Well, one of the things, and I always state this right from the get-go, is to just really encourage proactive measures, things that you can do to prevent this from happening. And I've sort of indicated that there are lots of things you can't do, but there are things that you can. And we'll circle back around to this in just a little bit, just talking about preventative measures. But specifically with Chegg usage during exams, what you can actually do is once your exam is finished, you can do a search on the internet just to see if, do a search of your actual exam questions. Or you can also search up, if you do, when you're into your marking phase and you're actually grading exam questions, if there are any sort of weird or suspicious answers, you can also search those on the internet too, obviously. But even right as soon as your exam's done, you can do a quick internet search, Google your exam questions, and see if anything comes up on Chegg. If your exam questions do pop up, then you can launch what Chegg calls an honor code investigation. And we'll talk about the exact steps of what that looks like in just a moment. Now, you might be thinking, this is so frustrating. I just wish that there was something we could do right away to prevent these questions from even getting posted onto Chegg or similar websites in the first place. Well, if we were in the US, we would have access to Chegg's Honor Lock service, okay, which is where you can actually ahead of time upload your exam questions to Chegg, specify when your exam is actually happening, and Chegg will lock the solutions or not even post it until the exam is actually done. So if you're okay with having your exam, and I think they specifically say, and then after that period of time, then they'll delete it or something. So I guess students can use it to study, but they can't use it during the exam, and then you can request that it's taken down afterwards. So a lot of people were really excited when Chegg launched this service last year when it first came out. But unfortunately, I've done a little bit more research, and I tried to actually explore whether we can do this here. But unfortunately, it's only institutions with a .edu email address, and that's, I think, regrettably only institutions that are registered in the US. So really, we don't have access to Honor Lock. We can just use the Honor Code investigation option, which happens after you notice that things have been posted without your permission to Chegg. There is also an option at looking at the solutions, which I mentioned, and kind of doing your own investigation based on suspicious kind of student questions. But then you are required to have a subscription in order to see the solutions. So some faculty have gone this route and have found it really helpful. They've actually signed up to have a subscription to Chegg. And I've also heard of departments sharing the subscription. So chairs or deans will pay the $24.95 a month, because it doesn't make sense for everyone to have a subscription, obviously. Okay, so let's say you did do a Google search after your exam is done, you found your exam questions on Chegg, and you want to do something about it. So Chegg enables you to launch an honor code investigation, as I mentioned, and it gives you 3 specific options of what you can actually do. The first is you can request like a takedown of the material. The second option is to request the account information of those who posted the questions. And then you can also request to see who actually viewed the answers. Okay. So you just, would go on their website, you click the little icon to launch a Chegg honor code investigation. Often students don't know that under the terms and conditions of the terms and conditions of privacy, that Chegg is authorized to cooperate fully with an investigation if there has been an alleged breach of the institution's student code of conduct, which is really helpful that they don't read the fine print and they don't know this, because it makes it a lot easier for getting solid evidence for an investigation. Okay, so in order to launch an honor code investigation and get information from Chegg, Chegg requires that you submit a letter from your faculty dean on Lakehead University letterhead with all of the links to your material. So once you've noticed that your material is actually showing up on Chegg, you got to go through, takes a little bit of time. You find all of your questions, you copy and paste the links to each of those questions, you send those to the dean. The dean would have a template similar to the one that's on the screen. This is an example from the Science and Environmental Studies faculty, and you probably can't read it because it's extremely tiny, But it says, in my capacity as dean, I'm writing to request your assistance in the matter related to academic integrity at our institution. One of my faculty members who teaches the course, blah, 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 has informed me that the questions for the midterm examination were posted on your website by students taking the evaluation. Goes on to say that our institution is opening up an investigation on the matter and requests that the information for the persons that uploaded the questions, as well as anyone who accessed the solutions during the times of the evaluations. They're also requesting, it goes on to the second page, says that we request that you take down these questions from your website as they are copyrighted materials. And then what happens once this is submitted, Chegg will respond within 24 hours, 24 to 48 hours. Typically, sometimes, obviously, a lot of these requests all come in because all institutions are typically, let's say within Canada, at least anyways, are all kind of on roughly the similar, exam timeline. So they would be all of these requests would be coming at the same time. So typically 24 to 48 hours, Chegg would respond with a report. And what do you get? What does this report include? Well, Chegg will provide you with the date and the time that the questions were posted. That will give you the date and the time that the answer or the solutions were accessed. They'll also give you the email address of the person who posted and of the people who viewed the solutions, as well as the username and IP addresses. So really what you're looking for in this report is you're looking for Lakehead email addresses first. And if there aren't, if there's personal email addresses used, then you can also look for recognizable student names that you might have on your class list. What you can also do too is, because it provides you with the IP addresses, this is all information that Chegg freely gives out these IP addresses. And then if you gave the exam through D2L, D2L also logs IP addresses. So it allows you to cross-reference and go, okay, the IP address, from Chegg for who viewed this question is the same as this Lakehead University student's IP address in their D2L when they wrote the exam. So it allows you to gather some pretty concrete evidence. And then you would actually just follow the normal procedures under our academic integrity code and investigate the breach as an instructor, unless it's a final exam or a midterm for an FCE course, in which case the dean would carry out the investigation. Okay, but all of this information would be gathered. And it's pretty straightforward, but it is time consuming, obviously, right? This is another thing that you'd have to do. It takes a lot of time. And I guess that's probably a little bit of an understatement. If you weren't discouraged enough by that, let's just talk about some of the other problems related to Chegg usage, specifically when related to exams, okay? One of the things is that Chegg, and this does work out for sharing subscriptions amongst faculty members, but it also goes for students as well. So students can share the $24.95 per month subscription to Chegg. So it does allow you to use Chegg on multiple devices to have access to a single account. So students will often share passwords with their friends. So when you get your report, it might say Jimmy, but it was actually Johnny who used Jimmy's account. The other challenge is that students sometimes use a private email, as I mentioned. So if they, you could see a whole bunch of students that accessed it during your exam time, but it might, wouldn't have a Lakehead email address associated with it. They might have used a different name, like a fake, alias, instead of their actual name or username. And then really the only identifier is the IP address. So in some of those cases, you can't, really pin someone down. The other challenge is related to the timing of these posts. So these will often, obviously, when your exam starts, all of these posts will come in quite quickly at the beginning of the exam. So the questions will be all uploaded. So if you're trying to catch the students in the moment, because you could start, while the exam's going on, you could start Googling to see whether your exam questions are coming up in Chegg. But it's because it comes in so quickly, depending how long your exam is, it could be incredibly difficult. And as I already mentioned, virtual or online kind of in-person proctoring, like it can't stop. It can't stop it. And lastly, this is probably, the most discouraging one, I think, is that Chegg is only one platform. So we're talking about Chegg specifically today, but there are so many others. I listed a few here, Course Hero, Slater, Quizlet, the Maple Calculator, Discord. Some students will even just use like Reddit, the Reddit like chat rooms and things like that. Those are kind of more kind of localized, smaller groups rather than like a global organization or whatever. So that can be quite discouraging. But I'm trying to just think like what other options or responses do we have? As I mentioned, kind of at the beginning of the presentation, I always really push and encourage like maximizing your proactive and preventative measures or preventative strategies. That is key. Talking openly in your class about different types of academic misconduct, showing your students how, contract cheating sites target them. Well, when they do a Google search and they optimize these searches. Talk with your students about some of the risks associated with it, not just the risks of, getting caught and getting a 0 on the exam, which is huge, but, I think just being open and saying that could happen, that could be an outcome that could cause them to fail their course. It could cause like just them to not be able to progress in their program. I know there's a whole layer of ethics, depending on ethics period, cheating on an exam, raises a lot of red flags, but especially in some of those professional programs, connect it with like their learning objectives and the outcomes and their future careers and their, life goals and things like that. But the other thing that I think sometimes appeals to students too is the risks of, financial exploitation. So sometimes there'll be people who blackmail students on Chegg or similar websites. So if they help them out and they, write an essay for them, or in this case, we're talking about exams, they answer that exam question for them, they contact that student later and say, hey, I helped you cheat on your exam. If you don't pay me $1,000 or X number of dollars, I'm going to report you to your dean. And then the student's now in this tough spot. And they've done it themselves, right? But I think that sometimes like that sort of approach can appeal to students and realize, okay, this is really risky. This is wrong. Not even going to consider this. Like I said, and if you talk about how they target and appeal to students, sometimes they can recognize that and not take the bait. I think having, obviously there's the AIM course, but it's pretty basic. The AIM course is just meant for a general understanding of academic integrity and getting into some of the different topical elements of academic integrity. But it's still useful to have students do that. Having them sign an honor code or a pledge, which I know a lot of our exams, right? At the beginning of the exam, students have to sign off on something. It's not necessarily going to guarantee that they don't use Chegg to cheat on the exam. But then you get into some of more of the practical advice when it comes to test design. And this is where I'm sort of outside of my area of expertise, and I would refer you to Teaching Commons for different ideas, tips, tricks, tools. But I know that some of the stuff that they would encourage would be, not using kind of reused questions, create like an original test bank for your exam questions, randomizing your questions, considering instead of having like a really, like an exam that's worth 50, 60% of a student's grade, like really high stakes, doing a number of smaller open book modules or quizzes. I know some instructors were exploring doing oral exams, calling students in pairs or small groups and, having them actually just talk out their answers, right? And then giving them time in between, obviously, to like kind of write things down and collect their thoughts. So it's similar to an in-person or like a writing exam. Trying to just make sure that you're setting up questions that do require some level of critical thinking, and the application is very unique or specific to your course. So you can't just, fish on the internet for contract cheating folks to help you out. Looking at doing it, having it be a tight timeline, not having, which the tight timeline thing, and then even just thinking about only being able to access one question at a time and not going back to other questions, those are effective, but they also really cause extra stress for the rest of the class. So like I said, this is only a small percentage of students that we're talking about here. the majority of your students, the majority of our students at Lakehead, this isn't going to be an issue for. So then when you start to implement, an exam that only allows you enough time to it's super close. Like, I think best practices is, we would say that give more time for online exams, drop the stress levels. So some of the tips, I think, for trying to crack down on usage of Chegg to cheat on exams also works against those good students. I shouldn't say good, the students that aren't tempted to cheat on your exams. It penalizes them and creates needless stress too. So there's not really an easy answer, but there are some options that you have to consider. But this is, obviously a big issue, something that has an impact on faculty members and instructors everywhere. So I think, it's just encouraging having discussions with colleagues, having discussions at faculty council meetings, trying to just talk about how to approach this from a discipline specific approach, because I think it's important. There's not one silver bullet to address this. So yeah, that's essentially, just the material that I was hoping to be able to cover with you today. I wasn't sure how long it would take to cover that, but I did want to leave a decent amount of time for some questions. So if you do have anything specific that you want to ask me, by all means, don't feel like you have to raise your hand or anything, and just unmute and